Hello everyone, this is Doug Griggs with PDS Equipment. Wanted to make a video to walk everybody through how to change your own subtank. This is a common thing that gets done on the Mark II series, and that's what we'll be covering is the Mark II series subtank. Now this will work for the Mark II and the Mark IIe, 3042 or 6042, doesn't matter. Okay, so this is the subtank. Okay. This feeds ink down into the head. This being the bottom side, this being the top side, okay? So we're gonna walk you through how to do this. So we're gonna do it in the machine, but I wanted to get it out so I could do some close-up videos. This is the print head for the Mark II series, okay? These are your nozzles. This is the bottom side of the print head, all right? And this is where the ink feeds in. You got two channels. You would have two sub tanks on each head, okay? One plugs in here, one plugs in here, all right? So these sub tanks, they snap onto that head like that, and it feeds, that's what feeds and regulates your ink levels going down into the head, all right? So what makes a sub tank is that, I don't know if you can see it in the video, it has a float in it. See it rolling back and forth through the translucent plastic here, okay? So as it pumps ink or feeds ink down into the head, that float rises, okay? That float rises. And there's a sensor on the side of this tank that reads that float level, all right? This is what the sensor looks like. Okay, so it's basically reading the magnetic field through the tank, and this sensor detects that magnetic field. Okay, if you look here, there's a set of tabs, and then this clips it on, and then there's an alignment pin right here. All right. One of the common mistakes on replacing this sub tank is not getting this clipped on correctly. It's a pretty, you know, tight fit. I mean, not tight, but you got to make sure you're flat against this. Otherwise, what'll happen is it won't detect the float inside the tank, and since it doesn't detect the float, you'll get a 61 error for an overflow because the tank's getting too high. Okay, there's too much ink in the sub tank. So when we're putting this in, these tabs, you see there's tabs right here on this sensor, okay, and the tab side goes flat against the tank and goes underneath that section right there, and that pin should line up and it'll actually snap on there, okay? And then this guy right here holds it in place, if you can see that, all right? So when we're taking the sub tank out, you're going to depress this guy right here. You push this down, okay, and this lifts out and pulls out, okay? I wanted to do this on the bench because this isn't going to be as easy to see once we're doing it in the machine. I'm not going to have you take this out of the machine just to replace this. That would take too much time, and it's not worth it. So now if you look at the top of the head, okay, you've got three connections here, okay? And this is what the style of connector that plugs into the top of this sub tank. So you'll see right here, it clips on, okay? These open up and it clips onto the top of the tank. So you've got three connections here, all right? One's recirc, to recirculate white ink. So you'll only have recirculation on white. You won't have recirculation on your color. You won't have recirculation on your clear. You won't have recirculation on your primer. You'll only run into the recirculation on the white. Now, most white machines, you have two channels of white. So you got one dedicated head, especially if you got the machine from PDS. 99% of our machines are clear primer and two whites. Okay, so you got CMYK, primer, clear, two white. So you'll have two sub tanks that are white, and that's one total head that's white, because remember, you got two channels, okay? And having two channels of white is kind of a big deal. So this clips onto the subtank. This is what feeds ink into the head. Same clip for recirculation, but you've also got one for air pressure. Okay, the air pressure will be a clear hose, and you'll see that later on in another portion of this video when we're actually at the machine pulling it in and pulling it out. Okay, because you can't get these lines in the wrong spot. You got to pay attention. They are marked. They are marked. So you can take pictures, you can write it down, whatever you need to do. But when you unhook these lines, you have to be sure to get them back in the right order, okay? Now, for heads that don't have recirculation, they will have a cap on them with no hose. It'll look a lot like this, but it won't have a port for a hose, okay? You have to make sure on your primer, clear, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black that you pull that off the old tank and put it back on, okay? And then in later videos, you'll see what I'm talking about. The section we're changing is white because I did want you to see the recirc line as well, okay? So in between this and the subtank is a seal, okay? All right, it's a rubber O-ring, okay? Now, some of them are blue, some of them are gray, okay? The E series was the gray one. That was the gray one. And again, I'll have a link to all these parts in the description of the video. So, you know, you don't have to worry about trying to get the part numbers right now. Okay. So, that's your O-ring. Okay. What you got to be really careful of, because when you're doing this in the machine right now, I've got all this room and it's not tight. Okay. But when we go to the machine, it's going to start getting a little tighter. It's going to be a little harder to do because chances are we're going to have the float tank sensor put back on before we do the lines. You can do it however you like, but that's typically how I do it. Okay. So if you look inside, there's a recessed area in the clip. All right. You want to make sure that that is seated completely down in there without being kinked up. Okay. What can happen a lot of times is people try to put it on and it's cocked like that. If you try to put it on like that, it's going to put a kink and you're not going to have a good seal. Chances are the reason you're replacing the subtank in the first place is because you've lost the seal here in between the subtank and the head. Okay. So this system is sealed. You can't have air leaking into this system. Okay. It's a sealed system. That's what makes it a subtank, because it has positive and negative air pressure. If it didn't have positive and negative air pressure, it would be a damper. Okay. A subtank has positive and negative air pressure, and it has a float to detect the level. All right. That's what makes it a subtank and not a damper. All right. So the chances are while you're replacing that is the seal here has failed and you don't have a good seal in between the subtank and the head. All right. It's very important. It's very difficult for this machine to maintain an ink level if it's letting air in, because if it's letting air in, that ink's going to run. It's going to drip out of the head, and it's very difficult for the machine to maintain the level with the float in there. Okay, so you know you could have a 61A or a 61B, and all that air is an indication of where that float is inside that tank. All right. So when you put this on, when you're putting these on, this opens up, okay? And it clips on the subtank. It's pretty easy to get this part wrong. This is where you really have to pay attention to what you're doing. All right? That opens up. And you'll hear it clip, okay? So that's a good seal. And sometimes what will happen is I'll go on a service call and I'll pop this clip off and I'll look inside here and there's a kink on that O-ring. The blue ones are a little more forgiving than the gray ones. The gray ones have a higher chemical resistance, but they tear and kink a little easier. All right. So I would recommend when you order the Subtank, go ahead and order these O-rings, okay? Because if you drop one and can't find it, something happens, or you got one that's kinked for some reason, and you don't have it, replacing the Subtank that probably wasn't the problem anyway. So when you pull these lines off the Subtank, you want to look at those O-rings. You may not even need to replace the Subtank. All right, it's possible you don't need to. You just had a bad O-ring. All right, so you can pull these lines off and inspect that O-ring. But if you replace the Subtank, go ahead and replace these as well. It's just good practice. These are cheap. You know, you're going through all this effort. You need the machine running reliably. There's no reason not to just go ahead and replace these. So again, I'm going to insert this line onto the top of the Subtank here and show you. And you want to make sure that both sides clip, okay? You want to make sure that side and this side is clipped on. And the removal of it is simply squeezing the top of the tab here. All right? And it lifts off. There's your O-ring. Now most of the time the O-ring comes off with the clip and the hose. But sometimes when you pull this off, it'll be stuck to the Subtank like this. All right? So be careful, because if you don't notice that, and you go to pull it out, you know, this could fall out and fall in the machine. So be careful with that. All right, so the rest of this video will be at the machine. We'll be at the machine doing it. I'll show you what cover to take off. I'm trying to do the video where we take off as few covers as possible. All right, so it makes it a little bit tighter, but it makes it faster. You can do this is how I do it. I'm going to show you how I do it in the field when I'm changing this tank. All right, again, so what you're going to be looking for is you have the tank, you have the float sensor, okay? These are the things that have to come off and be taken off and put back on. And you got to make sure that float sensor is dead flat against the side of the Subtank. That's very, very important. You want to make sure your O-rings are good. And you want to make sure that all three connections on the top of the Subtank, you'll have three connections up here. 1, 2, 3. You make sure all of those clips are seated well and the O-ring's not kinked. Okay? All right, next videos will be at the machine. Thank you.
I was going to contact you today, or email.
They have involved machine
Yeah, so, I mean, it's not, I mean, we usually have 200, but not the other 300,
Gotcha.
so. Yeah, and just like I said, they haven't bought the machine.
Hey, it's all play tonight, baby. Battle of the South Carolina loss. The Balls. This is Battle of South Carolina law. South Carolina, to get the rails that the motors are running on are behind these. You gotta take this cover
It's
off.
just always stuck in my
When
head.
you do that, the shutters fall out. So it's not like the old one. The shutters look the same. No, it was over the I popped this side cover off, and the shutters kind of come out on the side. We had to get them lined back up. You'll get it perfectly lined back up. Line in.
On this little.
This is the last one. That was actually one of my own problems that I made. I bet. What, 20? Dude, I don't even know Thank you.